Hello. Hi.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me
Okay,
okay?
perfect.
Lauren, can you
Yes, can
hear
hear
us?
you perfectly.
Oh,
I'm shocked that
awesome.
I got the technology right, so I had to
I
ask.
know. I feel the same way. It's always funny when you're doing these virtually, right? Where before you just walk out on stage and you sit down. So thank you so much for being here and to talk about this really important topic. And thank you to Founder Tribe for sponsoring us and bringing us together for this conversation. My name is Erin Horn McKinney. I'm the Executive Vice President for Innovation and Strategy for the Association for Enterprise Opportunity. AEO is a trade association for CDFIs, community development financial institutions, entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurial serving organizations and banks who support entrepreneurs and micro businesses. With that, I'd like to take a moment to go around and have our speakers introduce themselves. Lauren, can we start with you?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Lauren Mcfearin. I'm a vice president at Silicon Valley Bank. I work in the early stage practice, so looking after companies that are pre-seed up to Series A. We help them with their banking for UK and US jurisdictions, and all our companies are tech, innovation, or life science types of companies. And that's me.
Thank you.
Awesome. Hi everyone, thank you for having me. My name is Tui Coyote. I'm a vice president at Goldman Sachs, heading up our Launch with GS initiative in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. Launch with GS is our billion-dollar commitment to close the investing gap for overlooked founders. And we do that by intentionally backing overlooked founders and also funders. From a founder and direct investing perspective in companies, we're focused at the Series B plus stage. And then we sort of impact the earlier stage of the market by writing checks to check writers who are aligned in our vision that we should prioritize overlooked founders and funders. Really excited to be here to have this conversation.
Yes, thank you both so much for being here. And I think just in your introduction, Sean, you what you brought up is actually really the first question that I have, which is around how are your organizations supporting Black founders, and how did that come about? And talk about the evolution. And I pose that to both of you.
Should I go? Maybe I should go first. So I actually joined the Launch with GS team in January, and it was really because I've been at Goldman for 8 years. I was at a point in my career where I was like, I can either like look at the community from the outside or actually become sort of part of the solution. And how did Launch with GS start? It started in 2018. For the first time, we had a chief strategy officer, an amazing woman called Stephanie Cohen, and she really was like, data is showing that diverse teams outperform. At Goldman, a lot of the things that we do are driven by this thesis. We're a very diverse firm. We hire from with a diversity lens, etc. But then when you look at the venture capital ecosystem, women and people of color are underfunded. I live in the UK, so those are the stats that affect me the most. I listened to the last conversation where a good friend of mine, Patricia from Extend Ventures, was sharing that 0.2% of venture capital went to women. Only one Black woman has raised a Series A in the last 10 years, as at the beginning of 2020. It didn't even need to take 6 degrees of separation for me to realize that actually I knew her. And only 38 people of color have raised venture funding in the last 10 years. These stats are abhorrent, and as a firm, we really feel like we have an opportunity, and I think we'll talk about this later, about the role of large organizations and institutions to be part of the solution. And so 2018, it was at first actually focused on women in the US. In 2019, we expanded to include people of color, and we put up an advisory council of incredibly talented leaders in the Black ecosystem in the US, as well as decided to start a Black and Latinx strategy. So speaking about Black founders specifically, what we do is we recognize like the gap for venture capital funding is so far from the experience of like a white male to a Black founder that we couldn't just do capital alone. There was a lot of work that needed to be done in the ecosystem. And so we decided for the first time, we're definitely not an accelerator, but we decided to actually start our own in-house accelerator program, which we call our entrepreneur cohort. The first cohort was in 2020, just as the pandemic was starting. It was always going to be virtual, so I guess we were lucky in that sense. And the second cohort in the US was in 2021, and we will have our first Black tech cohort in 2022. And why are we doing this? One research shows that a warm handshake, will lead you to a check much quicker than cold calling will. And so I like to describe our accelerator program as a warm handshaking program. We are a large organization and we have so many different ways where we support businesses and companies. We have a focus on, delivering the best results for our clients. How do we bring all of this energy, all of this expertise to the Black venture ecosystem? And so what we do with the cohort is we kind of amass a deal team for every single company. We work with them to figure out, what are your priorities? Is it selling into some of our customers? Obviously, as a large investment bank, we have customers across the world in every single sector. We also have a very, very successful technology banking franchise. How do we sort of give our companies access to these ecosystems, access to this basically to this expertise? And so we have our most senior individuals at our firm, focusing on these founders for 4 to 6 weeks, and by doing that, we're actually responding to the excuse, I think, that a lot of investors have, which is that but we definitely want to invest in Black founders, but we just can't find them. Well, if you look at our 2020 cohort, you have 14 incredible companies. Our 2021 cohort, you have 15 incredible companies. And so we really take a long view on this, where we feel like we have a responsibility as a large organization, and personally, as a person of color myself, to use the privilege of being at a firm like this to really impact the ecosystem.
Thank you. And you're absolutely right. Social capital can be just as powerful or even more powerful than a financial investment. Lauren.
Yeah, I mean, so that was pretty impressive, Mcfearin. So really good to hear what you're doing at Goldman's. But Silicon Valley Bank have a program called Access to Innovation, which has been running since 2017. It's a global initiative, which is both in the UK and in the US. Because we've been in the US for a lot longer than we have been in the UK, obviously it's a lot more advanced out there. And also, as you'll know, there is so much more in this space in the US than there is here in the UK. So we are really trying to work with all the ecosystem builders here in the UK that are doing great things already, and we are investing in them. So, doing a lot of sponsorships with various different companies, helping them to, supporting them with their programs and their initiatives, and offering SVB's expertise. So essentially SVB, as the name would suggest, Silicon Valley Bank, we are the bank for tech and innovation companies. We have a vast network of people that we work with, whether that be investors, corporates, other clients, and just people that work in the bank which have extensive knowledge. So we use that and invest all of that, I guess, into the founders that we're working with. We've just hired a new diversity, equity and inclusion regional director who's going to be looking after the whole of EMEA. So there'll be a lot more new initiatives happening. As currently, we've been working under the guise of the US and doing as much as we can here in the UK, but making sure that, as I said, working with various different programs to really help give them our expertise. So people like, the Newton program, who are developing the next wave of investors. At the end of the day, we know, you gave the stats, right? There are not enough people of color getting investment, right? And that's because, unfortunately, everyone looks the same. So people are only investing in people that they know. It's a common, it's a common thing. We all know the story about it. I don't need to go into too much detail, but, if we have more diverse investors, they're naturally going to start investing in more diverse founders. And then the numbers will start to change. Currently, as you said, 0.2% of, Black founders were invested in last year. That is just not good enough. Even if we times that by 4, right, we're still at only 1%. Yeah. Not even 1%, less than 1%. Yeah. It's shocking. So we need to start working with people who can start implementing that change, hiring more diverse talent into tech companies who start to change the way things look, and then change the perception as well of having Black and diverse founders in the ecosystem.
Absolutely. It's interesting that you both talk a little bit about the data, because for so long, accelerators and incubators didn't even document race because it wasn't even something that they were looking into. Although you could look at a lot of the cohorts and see a lack of diversity, right? Not just with the diversity in race, but also in gender. And then over the last few years, there started to be more and more data that has come out to really, really highlight these issues that we're discussing. For example, Project Diane, which was a report that started several years ago by Digital Undivided. In their first study, they were able to show that the average successful Black female founder raises around $40,000, $40,000 to $50,000, where the average failing white male-led tech startup receives an average of 1.2 million. And those numbers haven't shifted that much over the past several years of that report being repeated. And I share that that data to show that even if we saw for Black female founders specifically, just because they're the ones that receive the least amount of investment, even when you're looking at historically, it's been less than 0.00001% of Black female founders that get invested in at all. But when you add Black founders, any founders of color and women together, the numbers still haven't reached a total. And so this is women as well, have still not reached over 8% of venture capital funding, right? Which is just staggering. And even though the last year and all of the things that have happened over the events of the last year have triggered a release of funding, it's interesting. And I should share, and I didn't say this in my intro, I actually am here in Minneapolis. So that's where I work from, which is, we like to think the epicenter of this global movement in racial reckoning, where George Floyd was murdered. As a matter of fact, just steps away from where my office is right now is where he was murdered and where George Floyd Square sits. And so I think there's a lot of things that have happened to address this funding just in the last year and a half. And so I'd like to speak a little bit more around for your organizations, what are some wins that have come out of the last year, and and what have you learned from all of those wins, and just kind of like the movements that are happening in your organization?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I like that you brought up the point about, more capital being available in the ecosystem, but, that not necessarily translating to better outcomes for people of color and for women. I was actually just reading an article before this that women and people of color are actually worse off than they were before George Floyd was murdered and before the pandemic. And the reason for that is actually what you touched on, Lauren, about investor mindsets and investor behavior. If most investors are white men, when they're put in a position of uncertainty, what they'll do is double down on what they already know. So rather than trying to do anything different, you want to deliver returns to your investors, you're going to focus on what you already know, which is investing in other white men that look like you, which is why for us, our approach is not just to invest in companies directly, but to also invest in, people of color that are, fund managers and are check writers who will go on to then invest in, businesses and people of color. So we recently invested in Collab Capital, which is run by Jewel Burke-Solomon out of Atlanta, to focus on Black founders in that region. That was a great win for us because, she's actually on our advisory council for our Black and Latinx strategy. So very close to home, but we trust her vision. And we know that the capital will be deployed in a way that would genuinely impact, the lives of Black people. Another thing I should say is, Partake Foods was in our cohort in 2020. She went on to raise venture funding and became the first woman of color to raise over 1 million for a food startup. And so another example is Landed, recently in our 2021 cohort, went on to raise a $31 million Series B round. And I'm just going to read what they are. So they offer a shared equity program to help teachers, first responders, and healthcare workers buy their own homes. We all know the impact of home ownership on generational wealth. And so, it's not just about investing in Black founders, it's also about investing in innovation. Human beings tend to, create businesses and ideas that actually resolve problems that we have and experience. And so when we exclude a huge part of the world, I mean, if you think about women, we actually are the majority of the population, yet we're receiving less than 2% of venture capital funding in the UK, for example. That is just not okay. And so for us, these wins, they're great and we're excited about them. But to be honest, there's so much more that we need to do. And, so this week has been London Tech Week. It's been very exciting. I've had the privilege of, obviously taking on this role in a pandemic over the last 9 months, meeting everybody on Zoom, including people like Gary from FounderTribes, etc. We're able to bring, a lot of people together, 2 nights ago for what I called the Black Leaders Dinner, just to talk about what can a program like Launch with GS and an organization like Goldman Sachs do to impact the ecosystem in Europe? And, I really left that dinner really understanding that it's not just about capital, because actually you find a lot of founders getting stuck at the seed round and not able to raise a Series A, or at the Series A round and not able to get to a Series B. Why is it important for banks to be involved in the conversation? The simple answer from my perspective is capacity. We have the capacity to not just support early stage businesses through our programs like 10,000 Women and 10,000 Small Businesses out of our foundation, but then we also can support at the venture stage with Launch with GS up until IPO, and then beyond into impacting the community. If we even go deeper into looking at the different stages of funding, we have different pools of capital that can be applied. One of our companies, Block Power, actually raised money from us through debt financing. So when you are a large organization with loads of different ways to deploy capital, I really do feel like it's a responsibility to try to adapt that to help the ecosystem that you care about, which is why I think it's very, very important for large institutions to get into this conversation, to start to create programs to drive change, and not just leave this to the venture capitalists and the VC firms, who for the most part are white male.
Right, and those policies, you do have an opportunity to impact policies and impact those that you have as clients or that you do business with by taking a look and holding them accountable with, their founding teams or who's on their board. And I think that it's not okay to say there's nothing I can do. It's not my problem. It's all of our problems, and we all are empowered to a certain degree to do something. And it's interesting you mentioned Joel Solomon, who I know is also a speaker during London Tech Week as well. So Lauren, did you want to speak to the question?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's really funny because I would like to say that at SVB, we haven't just had a knee-jerk reaction to what happened with George Floyd. We have been trying to do this since 2017 and before that, even before we started the Access to Innovation, it's always been at the forefront of our minds. And I guess what I would like to say is that, we're not just trying to just create something because we should do it. We want to do it, and we're trying to do it purposefully and with the best outcome for our founders. At the end of the day, what we're trying to do is we're trying to build a framework so that they have the best probability of success. It's all good and well, throwing checks at people, but if they don't have the access to knowledge, the access to the network, like what's going to happen after that? They're going to have a product, an MVP, and then what happens after that? We need to support these founders. And I think at SVB, that's where we're really, really trying to create this framework. And, we're sponsoring various different, as I said, ecosystem builders, such as Collab Capital, working with FounderTribes. And, we're all trying to solve the same problem, right? So, at Goldman Sachs, what you're doing is great. At SVB, we're trying to do something as well. And if we just all work collaboratively, we can all hopefully start to make those changes and work together. You mentioned about, financing some of the later stage companies. People need to understand what that means. If they don't even know what venture debt is, then how do you solve the problem for them? They don't know what to ask for. They're just walking blindly. So having access to information is also massive, and something that SVB is absolutely dedicated to doing. Working with founders, not just Black founders, but female founders, founders from various different socioeconomic backgrounds as well. Because again, that's where the knowledge really comes in. If you're not from, and I'll use the example in the US, but one of the main Ivy League universities, this isn't, VC investment is not something that's really spoken about, right? Yeah. Tech is cool now. So people are more having those conversations. But if you just go to like a standard college, especially here in the UK, it's not something that's spoken about. You get opportunities thrown at you. So, do you want to be a doctor? Do you want to be a lawyer? Do you want to go and work in travel or something like that? But it's having that education, I think, is really important and something that we're really, really dedicated to. Yeah. In terms of investment, we are working with, we've done an investment into Valence in the US, which is a massive Black talent hub and networking community. As I said, working with Collab Capital here in the UK. We're investing in our own functions within the bank. So creating a new channel which will be dedicated to finding all new talent, but with a laser sharp focus on diverse talent. So that's very exciting for us and, something that we're working on at the moment. So a few wins there. but definitely not stopping. And again, as I said, it's not just a knee-jerk reaction. It's very much, we want to do this and we want to do it with a purpose, because this isn't just something that's here for today. This is something that needs to go on, and it should be business as usual. It shouldn't be, oh, because this has happened, we now need to focus. The stats are shocking. We all know that. But we need to start making these changes. I read, actually, it's funny that you said about reading something just before this. I actually read, and I'm going to find it, that, and it's about female founders. It was saying that for female founders to make up 10% of all VC deals, just 10%, it's going to take up to 25 years. Now, how is that even possible? 25 years to make 10% of all deals done in the UK. Like, things need to be done and done quickly.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I love what you said about education, and it's actually a very important point, which is why for us, like I said, it's not just about capital. It's not just about investing in funds. It's also about the ecosystem and bringing people together, which is what we do in our core, what we provide training across all of these things. I was speaking to a close friend of mine who's a founder, and she was saying, no one told her that she needed to focus on MRR. She raised a seed round, and her investors were just kind of happy to keep her there, happy to have, a Black founder on their portfolio, that they kind of were okay with allowing to fail, because for them, it wasn't about the long term. Like, who was she going to go to talk about, what she needed to scale up her business, when we know that 88% of Black founded businesses are bootstrapped? Because the truth is, where are Black founders going to find friends and family rounds? Socioeconomically, we don't have those communities where we can just go and get, a $1 million check from a godfather, etc. So the education piece is extremely important. And I think, like you said, Lauren, working together, Google has done an amazing job of doing their Black Founder Fund, where they've shown us, 30 incredible Black founders in Europe. We should all see it as a collective responsibility to ensure that all of those businesses get funded and they do not fail. And, we all know that there's this silent work that we all do as people of color, where it's like, you're doing the thing that you're doing, but then you're also kind of working in the community and the ecosystem. And we know that that's a responsibility that we have to bear, but it shouldn't last forever. The ability to come together as a group of people, share our knowledge, share our thoughts, use our positions of privilege to move the ecosystem forward through collaboration is absolutely critical.
And I think you bring up a really good point too around what happens with a lot of Black founders is that they are brought in for photo ops and not really being critically assessed. I'm also the founder of Black Female Founders, a global membership organization for female-led tech startups and female tech leaders throughout the Black diaspora. We were recently acquired by Black Women Talk Tech. But one of the things that BFF did is we also had a pre-accelerator for Black female founders. And so many of them were so appreciative of that programming in the curriculum, because they said for the first time, even if they were able to get into one, it introduced them to the ecosystem. And I think we've alluded to before, teaching them the language. It can almost be, that can be just a barrier itself of understanding everything from the terms to the, how financing works. But the other thing is that, and let me just say that the camaraderie, of course, was a big community of having someone just be able to take race off the table and gender off the table and just really have community with others, because entrepreneurship can be a very lonely thing, right? Yeah. But the point that I really wanted to make was they felt like they were actually being critically supported, versus a lot of programs in situations they'd been in, they were just passed on through the program so they could be there for the photo op. They could be a number, and oftentimes were the only one in their cohorts and programs. But they felt like people were being too nice and not really helping them build their business, because no one wanted to be the one to say, actually, you need to work on this element of your business, and walk on eggshells with them versus actually supporting them. But I think you also both brought up an interesting point around changing the face of those on the other side of the table from founders, right? So when it comes to investors and banks, I really like to be solution oriented. I don't like to just talk about the problem. I like to give some solutions. So let's talk about how can the industry, how can venture capital really change who's on the other side of the table and the implications of that. And either one of you can go first.
Yeah, I'll start with that one. I think everyone has a responsibility to start measuring some data, right? And really looking at what your organization looks like. So if and we said it about the investors, if everyone looks the same, you're not going to have that diversity of thought, right? You're not going to have that diversity of different collaboration and so on and so forth. So it has to start from top down. So first of all, I think people need to look inside their organizations and look at who the managers are, who are the decision makers, who are the ones that are going to be, who can actually implement these changes, right? And then it kind of trickles down from there. So you'll find more people of color, more females, all that kind of stuff changing. And then the people that we then go and speak to also changes. And then that's how we'll start building more pipelines, and that's how we'll start getting more change and more people through the door. It sounds really simple, and I know it's definitely not that simple, because there's all kinds of issues. You hear this, there's all kinds of issues like, where do you find the talent? Where do you find the companies? Where do you find this, that, and the other? But if we have people in universities, like our dear friend Gary, speaking about entrepreneurship and so on and so forth, and speaking to Black people, young Black people, and making them know that this is actually possible. Look at me, I look the same as you and I've done it. Then it kind of gives more people inspiration and hope to do that also. If you have someone who doesn't look like you, who's not from the same background as you, saying, oh yeah, go and do it, it doesn't seem possible, right? And as I said, it sounds very simple, but I just believe that from the top down, from the top down, things need to change.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I mean, the last conversation, I think the last question was around how to get more people into angel investing. Andy Ayim runs the Angel Investing School, which I think is a phenomenal program that anyone can take to really learn the ropes about angel investing. And why am I talking about angel investing? Because the more check writers that they are, the more people will actually be encouraged to go into VC, to start companies. I was speaking to someone yesterday who was telling me that a lot of founders are stuck in jobs because they know these stats. If you hear that, only 0.2% of people that look like you get funded, why are you going to leave your high-paying job to take a risk on an idea? So I think it's really just creating like that the support network for Black founders and people of color, quite frankly, is not there. I don't think, a white male guy from Stanford or Harvard or Oxford or Cambridge will feel a sense of fear in taking a risk to start a business. But, a person of color in the exact same position probably has to think about family, is likely to be one of the first people in their community to be in that situation. Are you really going to risk it? Which is why those of us that, are in positions of privilege, have access to great education in a position of privilege, need to actually learn to put some capital into the early stage ecosystem. And that's why I'm such a big proponent of angel investing. Andy actually was at Goldman and did an introductory session to angel investing for our firm wide Black network, because this was early on in my journey of heading up Launch with GS. And I was like, this problem is actually a lot earlier stage than even starting to build a business. It starts from the mindset and the mentality of understanding, like, what is the value of investing in companies? What is the value of backing people early? And, angel investing is actually a really good route to building, again, generational wealth. And so our people just need to become more educated and put some time into angel investing. I love your point also about representation and diversity and inclusion, and I think, holding corporations accountable is extremely important. We spoke earlier about, not just the companies, but also the boards. Who are the people around the table that have these board seats? And we actually, came out sort of 2 years ago to say that we wouldn't take any company public unless they had one woman on their board. This earlier this year, we said that we increased that to 2 people, including 1 person of color. And we are saying that we, one of the largest investment banks in the world, are not going to take a company public if these things are not achieved. And it's definitely a good thing to do as an organization, to put out those stats. But also, I think what we've been really good at is creating mechanisms and structures to support that. So we have an incredible team that actually helps these companies source diverse talent. And so all of us working together are able to actually move the conversation forward by not just setting sort of these goals and these strategies, but also building teams and putting people in positions where it is actually your job to make this happen, not just inside of our firm, but also in the ecosystem.
Absolutely. You know, I think you also talked about angel investing, which I am really, and being educated on the fact that many people can be angel investors who don't even realize it, especially in our community. I'm an angel investor and a member of Pipeline Angels here in the US, which is an organization that teaches women how to be angel investors, to invest in women-led companies. But I think that there's opportunities for similar organizations to start, and there have been. There's a Black Angel Network here in the U.S. But what I've realized in the Black community, and this is just really globally, I see that there's such miseducation around what position do you need to be in order to be an angel investor. You know, in the US, you know, you only have to consistently make over $200,000 a year in order to be considered an accredited investor. And no one's checking that, right? Like nobody makes you pull out your taxes to show whether or not you've done that. But it's 200,000 individually, and $1 million in assets collectively if you're married. But the interesting part about it is that so many of our colleagues make that amount or more, but are not investing and could help be problem solve for some of, as you mentioned, that friends and family round. Because one of the other things that I find really interesting in the data, and also from just the experiences and narratives that I hear from Black founders, which is they're expected and oftentimes will not get invested in because investors will say, well, you're not working on this full time. And then until you do, how, you know, why would I invest in you? And I think one of you mentioned before, oftentimes for Black founders, they're the first person in their family to go to college. And there's a huge risk in making that jump. And it's very hard to be in a position to make that full-time leap, which is interesting because I think it's just an easy excuse, right? To make that decision when obviously if they had the investment, then they would be able to go full-time. And I think there needs to be cultural sensitivity around communities of color and what the path of entrepreneurship, what that looks like in different families. You know, I think culturally, for some Black families, or a lot of Black families, and especially for ones where somebody has been the first to go to university or college, it's not actually looked at in a positive way versus being a doctor or a lawyer or a banker or what have you, right? It's looked at as being selfish, putting your family financially at risk. And because you're expected, if you're the first one to come out of school, to go and help support the rest of your family, oftentimes help put others through school. And so there's a lot of internal conflict that happens with Black founders when making these decisions around following their dream and passion and their subject matter expertise and something that they know they could do, and the commitments that they have to the ones that they love the most. And that's not even extended family. Sometimes it's just even their immediate family because they don't have that friends and family round. So I also wanted to, you know, speak to this even for the two of you. You know, how has all that's happening and impact your professional trajectory? And, you know, and looking at your path, are there opportunities that you're thinking about where you'd like to see your career go so that you can be more impactful in this type of work?
Very good question. Very good question. So I'm extremely passionate about this topic, obviously being a Black woman. I also extremely passionate about working with startup founders. And I'm fortunate enough to feel like I'm in a position in my role, in my job currently, where I can do everything that I love and still help the people that I love, right? And what I'm passionate about. And I'm fortunate, again, to be given the autonomy to be able to mentor companies, to, you know, go out and speak to new community hubs and do a whole bunch of stuff, which sometimes people aren't fortunate enough to be able to do. Like, this is your role, this is what you've got to do, you've got to perform here. So me personally, I just want more of the same. I just want to keep continuing to build that pipeline. I want to continue speaking to founders. I want to continue, you know, sharing my expertise and giving access to the network that I've built at SVB and my colleagues, right? I don't know everything. but I work with a lot of really, really smart people who do. You know, and collectively we can really, really help founders. So for me personally, I just want more of the same, and just being able to continue to help founders, Black founders, female founders, all founders get to that point. But the fact that I can actually do what I'm passionate about by working with Black founders, and actually, you know, it doesn't matter how much they've raised, it doesn't matter where they are on their journey, I'm still given the autonomy to be able to do that. And that is extremely refreshing, I think, working for a big bank.
Amen. I agree with you, Lauren. I agree with you completely. For me, it's the same. I'm still kind of early in the journey. I mean, I've only done this role for 9 months, but I feel the same. I think it's such a privilege and an honor to be in a seat where you can do work that genuinely impacts your community. You know, you talked about sponsorships earlier. We've been able to sponsor Black Valley. We're actually going to the pitch day later today. You know, the opportunity to work with, you know, your community, feel like you're adding value. There's kind of nothing like that. And I think the good thing about, you know, the pandemic, you know, and everything that we've been through as a community is people are actually aligning what they do for their day job to their interest. And impact has become the way that we judge ourselves. It's like, am I going to waste my time, or am I actually going to do something that's impactful? And I was really, really glad that I was able to make that transition during the pandemic. And so for me, similar to you, Lauren, it's really just more of the same.
Well, and building on that, you know, as internal advocates, you know, what's our advice for individuals who are working within their corporations and trying to make those changes and be supportive, and how sometimes in certain organizations, identifying this passion and being supportive of Black founders, you know, people are in a position where it impacts their professional trajectory the more that they advocate, or the more that they get pushed into diversity, equity, and inclusion roles versus the actual, you know, main part of the business, right? What's our advice for those internal advocates?
I'm happy to. Oh, sorry. Go for it, Lauren.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if you, at the end of the day, you're working for a company, right? You've been employed to do a job, right? I think the first point I would make is do what you do and do it well, because then you kind of give yourself a bit of room to do whatever else you like. You can't be in a role and you're not performing in your role because you're doing all the stuff that you're really passionate about, because the first thing that's going to happen is, well, actually, do you know what? You need to take your foot off the brake, off the gas here, and do your day job. So I think the first thing I would say is, like, do what you're doing well, but if you can add what you're passionate about to it to help you do what you're doing really well, then do that. And then once you're kind of like on that journey, you can start adding all the other little bits and pieces that you're really passionate about. But don't give up, right? And if you're in a company whereby they don't want you doing that kind of stuff, or, you know, they're going to tell you, well, actually, you're not meant to be focusing on that, you need to focus on this, you need to kind of question whether you're in the right company. I would say, personally.
That was exactly what I was going to say. I was going to say, you need to understand the company that you're in, understand the strategy, and read between the lines. I mean, recently we moved and launched with GS from our executive office into our asset management division, which was really an effort by our CEO to bring all of our investing teams together. For me, the signal and the fact that we were sat in our asset management division said it all. It means that it's a priority. And so, you know, understand the strategy of the firm that you're in. I'm not one to sit and complain and moan. I think you need to put yourself in a position to work hard and do what you're doing well. But, you know, for many years before I ever worked in launch with GS, I volunteered with our firm, my Black network. I actually now head up the recruitment pillar for our firm, my Black network, because I meet a lot of people of color. So I'm in the recruitment pillar, I'm doing launch with GS. Everything sort of fits together. And the other thing I will say, though, is that doesn't happen overnight. You know, I say to people, it's taken me 7 years to get to this position where I feel like all the different threads of my interests are intertwined. So there is a little bit of like working hard and building up that credibility over years, and then being able to leverage your position to build, you know, the career that you want in the organization that you're in. But, you know, if you feel like you can't bring your whole self to work, you can't express your interests, I would question whether the organization is right for you in the first place.
I think that's a really good point. And I do think that if, there are ways to do what you love. And I think that the three of us are very fortunate to be in positions where we get to align our passions with our professions. But I think that there are opportunities to really say, if you're not in a place of space that aligns with your personal mission and goals, are you in the right organization? And especially now, given the last year, there are so many roles that have opened up that are around impact investing, that are around in large organizations, that are around programming that does this work and is helping to expand and diversify the ecosystem. I know that we're getting ready to wrap up on time, but I wanted to give you both a moment to address, how is your organization ensuring that the work that you're doing now and the programs that you've highlighted are authentic and measuring impact?
I love what Lauren said at the beginning about working with the community that you're already in. That was something that came off the back of our Black Leaders dinner, where actually Ashley from Color and Tech did say, he didn't think that people recognize that capital wasn't the only answer. What you need to be doing for Black founders is giving them customers. And that is something that I'm literally not going to forget. And it just reinforces the need to continue to do the work that we do with companies by bringing them into our firm and running the program that we run, because quite frankly, there is nothing like that. Remaining authentic, I think for me, I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel. I really don't. I do not think we need to reinvent the wheel. I think we need to be empowering communities that are doing work, communities like YSYS, Your Startup, Your Story, communities like Color in Tech, as you mentioned, Black Valley, Do It Now. Like, there's so many different ecosystem builders, Black Girls First with Nicole, Best with Nicole. There's so many different things that are already going on. As a large organization, you don't want to come into the conversation and try and dominate it with large check sizes and brand name and brand value. The purpose, I think, of this role and this program is to lend that brand value to organizations actually doing the groundwork. And I think that's what true authenticity is. And I think actually that's what the ecosystem needs, because so many people have been trying to work at this on their own. Maybe organizations like Silicon Valley Bank, Goldman Sachs, Google, etc. What we can actually do is empower these organizations with capital, but also with support.
And how are they measuring? So the programs that you all are rolling out at Goldman Sachs, how are you measuring that impact?
Well, we measure the impact by, one of the things that we're actually looking at is how quickly founders are able to then raise their next round of capital. I already mentioned some of the stories on that. We're very proud of that. I think we also recognize that this is long-term work. It's long-term work. We can't say, oh, we've invested in one Black company this year. Next year, how is it doing? Next year, we need to recognize that we need to give these companies time to grow. And I think one good thing that we do at Goldman is we're very team-oriented. And like I said, we have so many different parts of our bank and organization. It really is opening up as much of that to these founders as possible to ensure that they're not stuck at the seed round, they're not stuck at Series A, that at every point of when they need to raise capital and build their business, that we are there to support them. If they even wanted to sell into customers, we can provide expertise on that. The ones that will hopefully go on to IPO, we're right there with them in that as well. So I think it's a long-term process. It's a long-term program. And I actually think it will be detrimental to this to put really stringent ways of measuring impact on sort of an annual basis or even a quarterly basis on this kind of program. I always joke about this to my manager, that I come from our sales and trading organization. You're measured by your last quarter. And I remember 6 months into the role when I was like, how are we even doing? Does any of this even matter? Does it make sense? And it's just transitioning from that, hyper mentality of what are your numbers for the first quarter, to understanding that actually maybe what we're actually doing is planting the seeds, and somebody needs to plant the seeds.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, absolutely. Lauren.
I literally cannot say anything different to what has just been said. It's exactly the same as, at Silicon Valley Bank. We want to be there for the journey of our clients from startup right to IPO, lending our expertise, lending our network, lending our knowledge to these founders. And I totally agree in that if we start to put metrics on success, we're going to fail, because that's too much pressure. And we've never done this before. This is all new. So how do we even measure success? If we're getting one founder invested, if we're getting 5, it's all good, because it wasn't happening before. So, I think we have to just go into it with the mindset that, are we educating? are we opening up our network? Are we giving people access to capital? So that doesn't need to be capital from us personally out of our purse, but putting them in front of the right people that can do that. So, you mentioned about working with the Collab Tech and all the different, hubs out there, YSYS, Black Seed, so on and so forth. We need to empower them. We can't just come in on the white horse and be like, yeah, we're here to save the day now. No. There's so many people, as you mentioned, that have been doing this already and been doing it for a long time. But what we need to do is try and help pull everyone together to fight the same fight, to walk the same walk and go on the same journey together. And I think, as I said, if that stat changes from 0.2 to 0.3, to 0.4, we're winning. We're doing something right.
Yeah. It's so interesting. Even, I don't know if you all paid attention even to the picture that's in our backdrop here. There's not one person of color in it. Right.
Yeah.
And that's so interesting because, I think I just noticed it because I do think representation matters. Right. And it also in people need to see themselves reflected in the community and reflected with the organizations that they work with, people that understand their journey. I want to go quickly. There was a question in the chat. And so if there are, for those in the audience, if there's a question that you'd like to pose just in our last few minutes, please post it in the chat. But one that came up is, do you think there will be a minority lash? Because I'm hearing that in the US.
A minority what? Sorry?
They said the minority lash. I think backlash is what is really kind of what they're referring to. Will there be a minority backlash for like what's all this attention and effort that's been put toward minorities over the last year?
Oh yeah. Of course. We see it already. There was a great article in the Financial Times recently about Black Seed and what they're doing in terms of like creating the new Silicon Valley in Brixton, right?
Yeah.
And you go in to read the comments of that article, and honestly, like I couldn't even get through it. I was just like, how can you see this and take anything negative from it? Like at the end of the day, like all we're trying to do, anyone is trying to do, is just help people that have been underserved, underestimated, underprivileged, move forward. Like, how can that be a bad thing? So I think, of course, there's going to be backlash. And in a way, it is positive discrimination. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I don't know. I believe it's a good thing, right? But we just have to move forward with it. At the end of the day, you just got to keep going, because if you read every single comment, if you take all of that on board, you'll stop. You just got to keep going. That's what I'd say.
I agree completely. And my view is, luckily, venture capital is not, literature. It's not like we're writing novels and we're hoping someone buys it. These are businesses that generate money and will one day, like, the results will speak for themselves. So I think it's just, you're good. You're better than me, Lauren. I didn't even read the comments because I already knew what to expect. It's like you just have to drown out the noise and focus on the end goal. Like I said, this is a long game. As these companies have more and more success, you can't argue with results. And my hope is that, in my own sort of lifetime in doing this kind of work, people will start feeling really bad about not being in the deals that they should have been in because of how successful these companies are. You can't argue with results. And so I think all of us, you, Lauren, myself, even you, Erin, we're focusing on getting those results. And that's what we need to remain focused on, and not the noise.
Yeah.
So in our last, 6 minutes here, I want to give you an opportunity to tell those in the audience how they can find you, give some final remarks about, what you think what else the industry can do because I want to leave with some action items for those that are listening and who are with companies and want to make changes. And even more specifically, if you want to speak just to even banking, what they can do. So what are some takeaways that you want people to leave this conversation with?
I would say 3 takeaways is look at access to networks, finding access to networks, look at people who can introduce you to the right people for capital, to access to capital, and also education, right? And these are all three things that Silicon Valley Bank are dedicated to doing, right? We are doing events for underrepresented founders. We are creating content on our website, so you can go in and read up on what you need to do as a founder. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be a diverse founder. Any founder can read up on it, but that information is there for you. And you can reach out to me or any of my colleagues at Silicon Valley Bank. We're always happy to have a chat. We're always happy to kind of like lend our expertise. Many of us offer mentoring. I know a lot of people in the Black community are over mentored already. So it's not something that I would put, at the forefront, but it does help, or it helps having an accountability partner. Like I'm an accountability partner for quite a few companies, and they really benefit from that. So I would say, reach out to any one of us. Myself, you can go to svb.com and find me on there, or go to LinkedIn. You can find me on there also. And I'm always happy to have a chat and, kind of like introduce you to people within our network.
And say that you saw her on the Founders Tribe panel and use that as a way to make an introduction.
So for me, I actually would like to, I think all the comments Lauren made to founders were great. And I won't really add anything to that apart from the fact that, Goldman Sachs is dedicated to Launch with GS. You can go to goldmansachs.com/launchwithgs to find out everything that we're doing. Sign up to our newsletter. A funny story, actually, we had Andy Davis, who authored the Black Report, record a short video for us to share with our ecosystem. We have an ecosystem of about 12,000 founders, investors, ecosystem builders, etc., across the globe. And for many people, that was the first time they'd heard anything about what it's really like to be a Black founder. And for me, it just showed that this report didn't just get authored when I started the role. It's been there. But it takes somebody shining a light on it to allow that message spread. And I think to banking, to the industry, lend your voice, lend your brand equity, lend your networks, lend your capital, not actually lend it, actually invest your capital. Organizations, actually corporates, banks, we can't leave this to VC firms alone. We need to get involved because we have the capacity to support businesses at every point of the scale. And it would really be a waste if everybody didn't join in.
And how can those watching today find you?
LinkedIn, my name is here. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can go to goldmansachs.com/launchwithgs, sign up to our newsletter and see everything that we have going on in the ecosystem. But I'm always happy to speak to founders, always happy to speak to people trying to raise their funds. And, we've made public commitments of $1 billion. It was 500 million in 2018. By the end of 2020, we deployed all of it. So we doubled down. And I hope that we will continue to double down, but we won't be able to do that if we're not able to access the best founders and the best funders.
That's awesome. I mean, I really am so proud of the work that both of your organizations are doing to be leaders in this effort and doing the real work, because it's not easy, and showing up. I think we would be remiss if we didn't also give a shout out to Founders Tribe and encourage people to download Founders Tribe. If you didn't see the video earlier, I'm sure that you can look them up, but make sure that you're downloading it, that you're getting active on that platform, because as you saw in the video, it is the Tinder for founders, right? So that you can get matched with investors and others. And I really just thank you both so much for your time today. And hopefully we'll be able to do this again soon.
Thank you, Erin. Thank you, Lauren. Nice to meet you.
Thank you, Jen.